Welcome to today's webinar. As Bob stated, I'm Alex Vaccaro and I lead marketing at AlertMedia. I'm excited to introduce you to today's speakers. We are joined by two experts in the space that are going to be talking about today's topic. First, I'd like to introduce Larry Delfiner. Larry is an expert in leading business continuity and disaster recovery initiatives for both startups and global enterprises. Larry currently serves as the Director of Facilities and Business Resiliency for States Title, which simplifies the mortgage closing process through a patented machine intelligence technology and specialized closing experience. Prior to his current role, Larry was in charge of business resiliency at DocuSign, where he built the company's global business continuity and DR program for 16 global offices and about 5,000 employees. Larry is a practical hands-on leader who has devised and administrated a wide variety of business continuity and DR exercises, such as mass communication rehearsals and tabletop exercises. Thanks, Larry, for joining us today. We are also joined by Peter Steinfeld. Peter has been involved in the emergency communication space since 2001. Over the past 19 years, Peter has seen time and time again how reliable and effective communication can make a dramatic difference in positive outcomes. He currently serves as the Senior Vice President of Safety Solutions at AlertMedia, which offers solutions to facilitate critical communications to large audiences and help protect an organization's most valuable asset, its people. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Before we jump into the topic, I wanted to run through the agenda pretty quickly. So on today's webinar, Peter is going to kick things off by recapping the challenges that we've faced this year and discuss some of the lessons that we've learned. Then Larry will help us look ahead to 2021 and discuss what we can expect and how you can better prepare your organization heading into next year. Lastly, Peter will cover strategies for effective communication and discuss how this can support your business resiliency program. Bob, before we get started with the content, I'd love to do a quick poll, if you can launch that for the audience for us. So we'd love to know, which of the following do you anticipate will have an impact on your organization's business continuity in the next 12 months? You can select one or more of the following answers. So maybe COVID-19 uncertainty, remote work complexity, natural severe weather events, or perhaps partner and supplier disruptions. And this will just give today's speakers some context going into the webinar to help understand the audience and what you're facing this year. Bob, do we have a good amount of participants that have filled out the poll?
I'll go ahead and close that and publish it for you here, Alex.
Excellent, thank you.
No surprise.
See that?
There we go. Yes, no surprise there. Is this surprising to you, Larry?
Not at all.
Perfect. Okay, we will go ahead back into the presentation now and I'll hand it over to Peter to talk about 2021 and the recap.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alex. Before we discuss 2021 specifically and how business leaders can improve resiliency in the year ahead, what we want to do first is just take a moment to reflect on the past year and what we can learn from it as it relates to how we think about emergency planning and preparedness overall. So, 2020, what else can I say but what a year. COVID-19, obviously and justifiably the biggest story of 2020. I think it's over 60 million cases now, and there's about 1.5 million people just tragically no longer with us due to the virus and related illnesses. So its impact will undoubtedly be felt around the world for many, many years to come. But from an operational perspective, the pandemic has fundamentally altered how we think about work, including how and where it's done. In many respects, I would say that COVID-19 has ushered in the, quote, future of work long before really anyone ever expected it. It really pushed us out on the edge there. But COVID-19 is just one of several threats that businesses have faced this year. We have seen, I would say, historically active hurricane and wildfire seasons, as well as a really sustained period of civil unrest across a lot of the US with all the protests we've been having. And then each one of these represents, I would say, a potential threat to employee safety and requires that every organization prepare for potential disruption to normal operations. but while also juggling on top of it a volatile public health situation that just continues to evolve rapidly, and it all depends on your location as well. Now, while COVID-19, hurricanes, fires, and civil unrest may be classified as what you would say are traditional emergencies, they're really just a subset of the numerous challenges a lot of organizations have faced throughout 2020. So here are two additional categories that you'll see on the next slide. And the first is economic uncertainty. Despite what the Dow Jones Industrial Average or any of the other averages might suggest, many of the world's largest economies are on the brink of recession. And consumer confidence, which everyone knows is a predictive measure of consumer spending, it continues to steadily fall in the US specifically due to concerns about the labor market and the pandemic in general. So some industries such as travel, entertainment, hospitality, they're not expected to recover fully or for years. So, curious to see what happens there. But the second and often overlooked is mental health. So statistically, it's really worsening across all demographics, most notably among frontline workers, clearly because of what they're having to face every day, and yet young people, interestingly. So according to recent research by Mental Health America, the rates of moderate to high anxiety and depression are at all-time highs, with two things, loneliness and isolation, being the most cited reasons, obviously. Now, beyond this, there are challenges impacting operations. So organizations are facing new supply chain and communication challenges with the potential to disrupt their ability to reliably deliver goods and services and keep people working productively. From a supply chain standpoint specifically, in a recent survey, there's a little over 80% of organizations reported that demand for their products have decreased during 2020. It's 15% on average as compared to the previous year in 2019. Additionally, manufacturers have experienced longer lead times to source materials and parts. And then pushing people to work from home has certainly exacerbated communication challenges. The US Bureau of Labor Statistics, I think it was, they recently released data showing that roughly 21% of employees are currently working remotely, which is slightly down from earlier in the year. People are starting to go back a little bit, but the number is still vastly higher than it's ever been in history. As recently as 2017, the number of employees working remotely for just 2 to 3 days per week, not the whole week, was under 5 million. So we've seen an exponential increase in remote work. Essentially, I mean, it happened overnight. And that's including millions of employees that had previously never done so. It's not just like the people that were working 2 to 3 days a week from home suddenly went 5 days a week. You have people who never in their lives have they worked from home, working from home. So a massive change. So while 2021 is unlikely to be exactly like 2020, it's clear that preparing for worst case scenarios must also include for preparing for concurrent significant events. And I'd say that's a big standout this year in 2020 as far as the lessons learned. So with that said, Alex, I think we had one more poll we wanted to just check in on the crowd with before we turn things over to Larry.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. That was great context before we move ahead to 2021. So for our next poll, I think this would be great for the audience to sort of benchmark against your peers that are on the webinar today. As compared to prior years, how prepared do you feel your organization is to effectively navigate 2021 from a business continuity perspective? And I'm very curious to see how people are feeling as we head into the new year here. We only have a couple weeks left, so we'd love to see these results. Bob, how are we looking? Do we still have some coming in?
Went ahead and shared them there.
Oh, great. I haven't seen them come. There we go.
Looks about right. I mean,
Yeah.
I think if you asked this a while ago, they'd be significantly less prepared. But now that we've been going through this for 10 months or so, I would think that people start figuring out what they need to do better.
Yeah, I think we've seen with our customer base, it's almost put a spotlight right on these functions that didn't exist before. And now you've got a lot of executive level leadership involved in the planning from a BC perspective.
Yep.
Larry, so I'd love if you could take our audience through how people should be thinking about going into 2021.
Sure. Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. If you can go into the next slide. So if you were expecting me to tell you exactly what's going to happen in 2021, I wish I could tell you. I don't have a crystal ball. You know, we have no idea where or when a hurricane or where a hurricane will hit, or a tornado, or even an earthquake. All we can do is do our best to be prepared for it. Um, the best thing is expect the unexpected and be proactive instead of reactive. The biggest threat right now to our business, complacency. We've all been through this pandemic for now 10 months, and if everybody's like me, pretty tired of it, right? But we still have to stay vigilant in what we're doing, because the more complacency, the worse this is going to be. There's a vaccine on the horizon, but by the time it gets to the general population and everybody, it's probably 3 to 6 months at least. As Peter talked about, it'll probably hit the frontline workers first. I know it's coming out. I'm out in Washington, and it's already got here, but we have no idea. Not everybody's going to take the vaccine, right? So we still have to stay very vigilant on what we do. And during the pandemic, there's always a secondary and a tertiary events. Peter, again, he brought this out. California had wildfires and power outages, and Texas and Florida had hurricanes. So, and there's always the threat of cyber attacks, right? Mm-hmm. So even if you're handling one, Mother Nature and other people don't care about that you're already handling an event. More is just going to come, right? So I would say that in 2021, we need to not be complacent and stay vigilant. It's how we prepare for the threats, how we direct our resources, and how seriously we take this whole thing, right? Because just now it's COVID, but who knows what it is next year. In 2021, I would say, make sure that, the safety of your people is very important. We need to stay vigilant. We can't prepare for everything, but, you have to be prepared for when events do occur. My company, what we do, we're doing quarterly mass communication exercises, and we use AlertMedia. We send it out and let everybody know, and we have multiple methods of communication, because what we don't want is people think it's spam or anything else. So by muscle memory, we're doing this quarterly, because any event could happen at any time. We have West Coast offices that could be hit with earthquakes. You've got tornadoes, you've got hurricanes. So the more we communicate and we practice, it becomes muscle memory. And it's better to over communicate than under communicate. Your employees need to know that, hey, you have this mass communication tool. And if any of you have kids, when I was growing up, if we had a snow day, we had to listen to the radio and see, and it was always the anticipation of was my school closed? Well, I can tell you now, I have a small child, he's 11, and I get a text, an email, a phone call from the school saying, hey, we're delayed, we're closed, whatever it is. So mass communications efforts are very, very important. So if you can go to the next slide, Alex, thank you. So when it comes to business resiliency, I think everybody will agree that the single most important aspect is the people, and their safety. But at the end of the day, we have business continuity in place to mitigate financial impacts of an event. And this slide will help illustrate that. FEMA does a fantastic job of tracking down what happens during emergencies and as well as afterwards. And according to their data, roughly about 40% of small businesses that are impacted by recovery or by an event never recover. And of the ones that do recover, about 25% fail in the first 12 months. And of the rest that actually do stay alive, they never fully recover their financial losses or the impact. And you might think, well, that doesn't affect me because that's small business. Well, if you look at the graph on the right, it's talking about in the hundreds of billions, of dollars that are affected, and that cause effects. And you know, we don't have the data from 2020 yet, but I can guarantee, and you saw some of the things on Peter's slides, that 2020 will probably be much higher than any of the other previous years, because not only of the normal events that have happened, like the wildfires and the hurricanes and the power outages, but COVID has taken a significant impact, or given a significant impact. So when you have plans, you're better able to prepare your people, you know, their safety, and thinking that when you have them, you're thinking about the various points of exposure and risk. And when you document policies and procedures to address them, you reduce the overall risk profile of the organization. And plans should always include how you're going to communicate to your employees. That's super critical. And, you know, I always use it with the SMS, because not everybody has their email open, but I can guarantee all of you people on the phone or on the webinar have your cell phone, and you always hear the ding or whatever special ringtone you have that says you have a message if it comes via SMS, where you don't do that with email. And finally, a resilient organization has happier customers and a greater reputation. And as somebody who sits through customer and certification audits, I can guarantee you will not pass an audit if you do not have plans. So, and one of the things, Warren Buffett has a nice quote. It says, "It takes 20 years to build a brand and only 5 minutes to destroy it."
Yep.
So how are we going to prepare for 2021? You can go into the next slide, Alex. So all plans should cover the 5 Ds: denial of people, denial of partners, denial of facilities, denial of technology, and denial of brand and reputation. So the people, that's pretty simple, right? I mean, prior to COVID, most companies were very ill prepared to support your entire workforce going remote. I think based on the poll, it looks like everybody is a little more prepared now, because they understand that there's remote capabilities. And so many companies had geographically dispersed teams just for a pandemic issue, right? You know, at DocuSign, they had teams in Ireland and the US, and that's if, you know, there was a regional pandemic, but nobody was expecting a global pandemic, right? So then your partners, denial of partners, you know, how many people could not find toilet paper back in March, right? Because the supply chains, right? Your partners. So you want to make sure that all your partners, your applications, your vendors, and your partners are internal as well, who you rely on. Denial of facility. Well, exercise working from home, the bandwidth capacity, technology, there's cyber attacks, malware, and brand and reputation. How many people remember Ashley Madison? Yeah, they were going to go public until they had a breach, right? So their brand and reputation went downhill. So you don't hear from them again. If you can go to the next slide, Alex, sorry. So starting with the 5 denials, what's changed? You know, are you reassessing your business? Has it grown? Has it gotten smaller? What challenges does your industry face? Look at the people. Have your employee base increased, decreased? Have you lost certain leadership? Look at, you know, the partners. Have your partners gotten better over the time? Have some of them gone out of business? Facilities, do you need more space, less space? A lot of people, you know, I have friends that moved from Seattle to Michigan because they can work from home now, so it doesn't matter where they live. Has your technology changed? Have you gone from Teams to Zoom to Slack to, you know, the different things to make your communications better? Do you have a mass communication tool? And has your business, you know, how has your business reacted to the crises? Positively, negatively? I'm guessing hopefully most people will have a positive effect at the end of the day. So if you can go on to the next one. Thank you, Alex. So redundancies and dependencies. You know, you set up redundancies, you know, everybody thinks that their phone, their car, everything's going to work all the time. Well, what if it doesn't? You know, do you have redundancies in place? Do you have teams geographically dispersed? Can you work from home? Do you have redundant communications? You know, it's your people are the most important, but your partners, do you have redundant partners? Did your partners fail? Or have you said, oh, okay, well, now I need to have an alternate partner? Your facilities, technology, brand, and reputation. All of these things you want redundancies and dependencies. Do a dependency analysis if you haven't already. Understand your processes and how important it is, what you rely on to get your job done. Is it a certain application? Is it Slack? Is it Office 365? Do you have any single points of failure? Because I'm guessing that if somebody had COVID and they were a single point of failure, there's an issue now, right? So if you could go on to the next slide.
Hey, Larry,
Alex,
real quick.
Yeah.
Something that I see a lot among not just our customers, but in general, is people just kind of having hope as a strategy that people can actually do work at home the same way they do it at the office. And it's like, oh yeah, just you were able to run payroll at the office. You can keep running payroll at home, even though you're using an old dial-up line or
Yep.
sketchy internet. So what have you experienced there? Or what have you seen, and what advice could you give to people when they're thinking about those things?
Well, I always say it's not a problem until it's a problem. and then everybody, it's an emergency when it happens, right? So the more things you can think of, and it's what I talked about earlier, is be proactive and start doing some exercises and really the exercises are, you know, nobody wants to take the time because it's their beyond tertiary job, because everybody has their primary jobs. But if you don't, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but the more you practice and get muscle memory, and again, prepare for the unexpected. And you can't prepare for everything, but you can exercise and prepare your teams to know what to do when something happens, when an
Expose
event
the
occurs.
weakness. Yeah.
Expose the weak.
Larry, there's a Peter brought up remote work, but and obviously we've had quite a bit of practice at that now. Are you seeing people, or are you personally planning for a return to the office, and are you rehearsing that?
Absolutely. We do hope to get, you know, put all this behind us. I think there'll be a little bit different setups in how offices are done, where it used to be 150 square feet per person, maybe 200, 250. You may have higher cube walls, less of the open collaboration. Like I know engineering teams would have those, you know, just a desk and everybody facing each other in a close area. That may not happen. You know, our business is a little bit different at States Title, but you know, there's different parts of the business. So I think just we're going to see how it plays out, because as I said, not everybody's going to take the vaccine, and so that can be an issue as well.
Thanks, Larry.
Larry, are you saying I'm going to get my 1990s cube back?
Yes, something like that, where it's really tall and you're in your own little box.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think that's going to be dependent, but I think what I've been seeing is a lot more people are going to be working from home, and because now we realize that we can, right? Because there was some, oh, you have to be in the office 8 to 5, and well, there's people are actually, a lot of people are more productive in a sometimes in a bad way, because you don't have to commute, so you get up, get online, and you're there, right? And then you can always work. But you definitely have to make sure you take some breaks, because you'll burn out. And I know for me, I can't play any sports right now, so I need my breaks.
Absolutely.
So planning ahead, now it's time to be proactive. And I think Peter teed me up for this one. You know, what have we learned this year? Have you or will you do a lessons learned? I think this is really important, to not just go, oh yeah, we made it past COVID, so we're just going to move on. It's super important to do a lessons learned. As I mentioned earlier, when we do our exercises, we put together objectives and a set of target metrics. And we want to make sure that if we said 100% of the people answer via mobile or whatever it is, that did we make that? Did we achieve that goal? And if we didn't, what do we have to do the next time to make it better? So I think it's really important to be proactive in your business planning, and instead of constantly reacting to events, which is what many companies do. It's like, as I said, out of sight, out of mind. It's not a problem until it is. But reassess your current plans, get buy-in from the leadership, and get the resources you need. I think people, 10 months ago didn't know what business continuity was, and because I would go to places, people would meet me and go, "What's business continuity?" And I'd have to explain it to them. Now I think everybody knows what business continuity is. Um, so I think right now it's get your buy-in from your leadership. Tell them you need the resources, the budget for next year. It's a good time to start planning and training and doing the exercises for next year. I can tell you, if you're not proactive, I'm a river guide, and if I can tell you, it is much easier to run a Class 5 rapid when I prepare and I'm proactive. The earlier I set up for the rapid, the easier it is for me to run it. By setting up early, I can make subtle adjustments as I'm going through, and instead of making major adjustments, which are a lot harder. Once I'm in the rapid, if I didn't set up and I wasn't prepared, I can guarantee I'm going to swim, right? And planning ahead. So I had a team, an office out in Ireland, and when I was building business resiliency, and they were like, yeah, well, we got enough, we're okay. So I said, okay. I couldn't force them, so we did the basics, and then 3 weeks after I left, Ireland had a hurricane. They don't very often get hurricanes, right?
No.
And it was the end of quarter. So there was, it was a significant disruption for them because they did not plan. And they called me up and said, "Hey, when can you come out here? We really need some help." So I went out back in a couple months later and helped them. We did some exercises, we put together a plan, and we trained. And wouldn't you know, 3 months later, there was a snowstorm, 3 feet of snow. And again, Ireland does not get snow. So 3 feet of snow, they were closed down for 3 days, all the transportation, the airports. But you know what? It was business as usual for us because we were prepared. We planned, we exercised, and there was no issue.
Wow.
So that was, I didn't go, "I told you so." I just said, "Yeah, I'm here to help." So again, I think, exercises are very, very important, but they're only as good as the efforts you put in. And regardless of solutions, the best companies that exercise and use that and take the data and figure out what is missing, and it's all about what should I say? It's all about what you have in place and what you don't, and figuring it out. So, and don't call them exercises, or don't call them tests, because people think tests denote pass fail. Call them exercises, right? Because again, you want to focus, you want to identify where you're strong and any areas of improvement. And as Alex had mentioned, I've worked with teams all over the world, and I can tell you that my most resilient team was in Israel because they live and breathe business resiliency every day. And they were like, "Yeah, what can we exercise? Tell us what else we can do." And so we put them through a lot of different exercises. And I got a call, an email from them when the COVID hit, and they said, "Larry, thank you so much for preparing us. We have no issues. We're well prepared going in." Whereas some of the other teams, not so much, but they live it and breathe it every day.
Wow.
So I think it goes into what effort you put in is what you're going to get out. So if you don't put a whole lot of effort in and don't practice regularly and get your muscle memory, it's all for nothing.
Larry, when you're talking about rehearsals, and maybe you're going to talk about this on this slide, what frequency do you recommend? That's a question that we get all the time from our customers, and I see a couple of people in the chat asking that question too.
So I think it depends on your company, your organization, but base it off of your teams, understand what they can do, right? So we're doing mass communications exercises quarterly. I would suggest at least quarterly, some of the bigger tabletops annually, but you know, for certain processes, the more exercises you can do, the better. But again, it's how much time does your teams have?
Right. And buy-in can you get probably from the wider
Exactly.
organization?
That is the big thing, is the buy-in. So lastly, you know, I have a quote that I read in a book, and it says, trying to build a crisis management team during a crisis is like trying to install a smoke detectors and a sprinklers system while your building's on fire, right? And I thought that was pretty profound, because that's what a lot of people were doing during COVID. It's they hadn't practiced, they hadn't exercised, and all of a sudden they're trying to learn to communicate and figure this out while the building's on fire. So, and with that, I will turn it over to Peter.
Larry, before I
Oh,
turn it over to Peter, can I ask you, there's two questions that have, additional questions that have come in about exercises that I'd love to ask
sure.
you now. One of them is, what type of exercise do you think works best in today's environment when we can't necessarily be in person?
Well, I guess it's a plug for AlertMedia. I think a great exercise is the mass communications, right? Because you want to make sure that all people's emails and their cell phone numbers are in their communications. Because if there was a earthquake and you needed to reach people to make sure they're safe, again, you need to have access to your people. I know this is for there's a data privacy thing for outside of the US more so than in the US, but I think that is a good one. And also just look at your plans and review, check, you know, are the communications, if I'm trying to call Peter, is his number correct in there? And I'll use this as an example. Peter, when we're coming into this, Peter's name was spelled wrong, and that had to be fixed, right? So it's just little things like that that you just want to make sure that, because when in an emergency, you're not going to have time to figure things out. It's bells and whistles and things are going to be blaring, and it's going to be very chaotic. So
Right.
just the simplest things that you can look at your plans and say, hey, oh, is Peter no longer at the company, right? Because are your plans up to date? When was the last time you exercised? And again, when you go through certifications and the customers and audits, they're going to ask you all these things. How often do you do it? And when was the last time you did it? They don't necessarily care as much what the results were, but just that you actually did the exercises.
Yep. And then this is a great follow-up question that someone had: with messaging exercises or communication exercises, what percent of the population should I expect to respond? And what percent should I expect to add their personal cell phone?
Well, that's a really good one. And I'll start with the personal cell phone thing. Again, if you're a global organization, there's more hesitation outside of the US due to data privacy. And I'll tell you, France was a big one, and nobody wants to have their personal, but we assure them that it's just for these purposes to reach you in an emergency, not that we're going to distribute it or send you spam. And sorry, Alex, can you repeat the question, the first part
Yeah,
of the
and then
question?
the other part was, what percent should I expect to respond during a test or an exercise?
So I will say, if this is the first time you're doing it, have low expectations, but it's a good base. Get that as a baseline, right?
Yeah.
Use that. I think obviously 100% is the best, but I would take 75%. I think when you're first starting out, shoot for 50, right? And you know, it's all about the training. So when you have people, your orientations and things like that, talk to them. Whoever your business resiliency person is, go into the orientations and explain how the importance. You have to tell people why it's important to them and what benefits they get out of it, rather than just forcing it down their throat, and explain the importance of it. So I would shoot low and then test in another month or another quarter and see if you've increased, right? And see if people send it to spam. That's a big one that I've found is even though we send notifications, say, hey, next week sometime you're going to get a notification, we get, a ton of people that send it. Is this real? Because we're taught now in this with the cyber and all that, don't click the link. But
question everything. Yeah.
yes.
Thanks, Larry. Okay, we'll come back because there's more questions that I think you can help answer at the end.
Sure.
But Peter, if you could talk to the audience a little bit about improving business resiliency through communication, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you recall one of the slides I presented earlier, it did show that a tremendous number of organizations have been experiencing communication challenges throughout the pandemic. And clearly, Alex mentioned it, but communication is near and dear to my heart because as I've seen throughout the years, nothing ever goes 100% according to plan during an emergency. And communication really is your best chance of getting through any situation with better outcomes. You have to be able to observe the situation as it's unfolding, call audibles based on what you're seeing, and then communicate that information quickly to the affected individuals. So I would really strongly encourage you guys to spend some time thinking about how you can improve communication so you'll be better able to handle any situation that's thrown your way. And then when I say communication, it's not just sending messages to employees, it's also about your executives and maybe key emergency responders receiving real-time communications about incidents that might be impacting your people so they can take swift action. So on this slide here, let's start by talking about technology. What can you do there? First, I would say it's very important to invest in a true emergency communication platform. We all have access to things like email, chat tools, telephones, and things like that for communication, and then things like social media, news websites, TV and radio for breaking news. But it's exponentially more valuable and a big time saver if you can put it all together into a single platform that's really purpose built to handle emergencies instead of trying to cobble together a disparate set of tools that you're just going to struggle with. So another thing is you want to find a system that can be your eyes and ears and then bubble up information that's relevant to you, only the things that impact your people and locations. Because you aren't always in front of your computer when emergencies happen, the system absolutely should be accessible from mobile devices so you can view warnings about critical situations and then initiate notifications and then review responses that people send back regarding that, all on the go. And of course, you want to ensure that the vendor takes all the proper precautions around data privacy and security, because you're going to be storing, as Larry mentioned before, people's private contact information. And if you get ahead of it and tell people, look, we're not using this to send you reminders to do work or complete this report or something like that, it's literally for your own personal health and human safety benefit, you have a much stronger uptake there. Always explain the why behind it first.
And Peter, if I can add something onto that. So one of the nice things about having a mass communication tool platform is you may write one message and it will go out to multiple people, and you can set it as having in 10 minutes a reminder. Whereas if you send an email and you don't get all the responses, then you have to send another email and only target to those particular people. So this it's more automated and it does the work for you and reaches a lot more people in a lot more methods or media ways than just sending an email out to a mass email.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of leads into the next two here. While sending messages to people is valuable, it's really important to provide a mechanism for people to respond so you can actually make sure that they received and read the message. Just because it technically went through doesn't mean that they actually read it. So getting that confirmation back is great. And perhaps you could even provide the opportunity for them to include additional information, like answering survey style questions, like, are you okay? Press 1 for yes and 2 for no. And then having all those real-time updates aggregated into a single screen can make a real difference as you work through that emergency and how you're going to respond. You know where to essentially triage the situation and direct your resources. And because you can't be certain, Larry, to your point, which channels are operational and accessible to certain individuals at that particular time, it's really important to send your communication over multiple channels at once. If you rely on just that one channel, many people might just simply miss the message or receive it far later than you intentionally desired. Another important consideration is the user experience during emergencies. I mean, we can all admit it, people are under stress and not thinking clearly. Someone once told me it's like everyone's IQ drops 20 points. It's the stress that causes it. So any tech that you use really should be simple and intuitive. And if it's not, people will be afraid to use it and they won't use it, or they'll use it incorrectly. And either way, it's not a good outcome. And then just lastly on this slide, be sure that the system provides both real-time and historical reporting insights. And you can use the real-time feedback to understand if your messages are getting through, like I mentioned before, or not, which is important to know. Got to distinguish between that, as well as compile information about the status and well-being of your audience, which again can help you triage and understand where to focus your efforts. And then the more detailed reports will provide insights later on for post-mortem analysis, so you can better understand what worked, what didn't, where were you seeing a lot of failures, how could you fix that, and then enable you to improve for the next incident. And if you're doing this on a quarterly basis through testing before an emergency happens, all the better. Speaking of preparation for the next incident, as you'll see on the next slide here, just a quick example of one of our clients, Paradise Valley Estates. They are an AlertMedia customer, and their recent experiences with wildfires is a great example of how the combination of preparation and a solid communication platform can really pay dividends. Now, if you don't know them or who they are, their community basically spans it's roughly 75, 76 acres in Fairfield, California. And it's home to, gosh, it's a little over 500 residents. They're mostly military vets and retirees. And this is back in August 2018, they got a scare. It was a grass fire that started near the community, and it spread to a point that became a threat to some of the residents. But they did not have a mechanism to quickly reach people and let them know what was happening. Now, fortunately, that fire in particular was contained and didn't cause widespread damage, but it definitely prompted the community to start looking into emergency communication solutions. So in early 2019, they adopted our platform. They immediately began leveraging the system to create a single source of truth for all employees that work there and the residents, all their contact information. So to Larry's point, they made sure they worked on that. It was up to date and ready to go at a moment's notice. After doing so, they began testing the system for a lot of different scenarios, so building it into that muscle memory. And then just a few months ago, with this historic wildfire situation in California, they ended up having to use AlertMedia to organize an evacuation of the property due to a wildfire that was really close to them, and they were able to get everyone out to safety. So that was fantastic. Now, for this next point of consideration on the next slide, I think the best way to set this up is simply to say that things have changed over the last 5 years. There's an incredible flow of information out there combined, and this is important, with people's expectation of knowing about everything immediately all the time. When something happens, if you as an organization don't get ahead of it and communicate with your employees, they're going to rush to the grapevine, kind of like they always did, but now the grapevine is turbocharged by social media. And if you don't control the narrative about a situation, someone or something else will step in and do it for you, which is not good. So you just got to get ahead of it. In the past, response times came with a little extra leeway, but that window just continually shrinks and shrinks with all this tech that we have out there. So one of the best ways I think you can positively impact response times is by first obtaining proactive intelligence about potential threats before they impact your organization. And then secondly, having the ability to communicate with the right people quickly to remove them from harm's way. And then lastly, sometimes there's this tremendous confusion as a novel or new situation starts unfolding. So it's important to be able to quickly connect with key executives and emergency responders to discuss the situation and determine what those next steps should be. So having an easily accessible conference line that can be launched quickly can be really helpful. Something where you can just press a button, have it call everybody, get everyone on the phone to discuss it, and then figure out what you're going to do can make a big difference.
I've actually used that feature, Peter, and it works really well, because instead of somebody trying to get a Zoom or a Teams meeting or whatever, and here's the code you have to punch in, you just send a message, it dials everybody's phone, they answer it, and it says press 1 to, whatever message you put on, you press 1 to accept, and it puts you right into the call. So everybody's right there immediately, rather than getting on their email, typing in the code and all that stuff. So it was really helpful.
Yeah, and it seems like it's a simple thing, and when things are normal, it's not a problem. But when you're under stress and something's happening, it makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. And I always say, exercise it to make sure it works.
That's right. Yep. Well, no matter what technology you buy or processes you create, effectively executing your business continuity plans definitely requires an ability to reach people during an emergency. And to do that, it's vital to ensure that you're collecting and maintaining thorough and accurate contact info about your employees, like Larry's been mentioning throughout this conversation that we're having. So now, first of all, this includes the obvious, like phone numbers and email addresses, but also the less obvious that's oftentimes overlooked, like physical locations for work and home, as well as job responsibility, schedules, skill sets, languages. All those things can be very, very useful as you're later trying to segment your audience and target people. So once all this information is collected, you can leverage a modern emergency communication solution like what we offer to basically send employees notifications very quickly and easily across many different channels, like we talked about: voice calls, text messages, emails, mobile app push notifications, even computer screen pop-ups. So people are like really zoned in working, they see a message pop up on their computer and they have to interact with it before they can go back to doing what they were doing. And then, like I was alluding to earlier, with all that other contact info, you're going to be able to segment your population and send messages only to the employees who need to receive them, such as those maybe traveling in a certain region, or those who are based out of a specific area or on a certain floor of a building. The more info you have, the better to be hyper targeted in your communications. And I think this is really critical for two reasons. First, you want to ensure those who are actually in harm's way for that particular situation are communicated with early and often, to Larry's point before. And then second, you want to avoid sending information to people who aren't involved, because then they'll be more likely to tune out future communications that actually do to apply to them. So over communicate when someone is involved, back it off when they're not. You could maybe have pages where people can come learn more about it, but if you're pinging them constantly and it doesn't apply to them, they're just going to stop paying attention in the future. Now, something else that people often overlook is that aside from maintaining up-to-date employee data, it's also important to have accurate contact info in hand for third parties you may need to connect with for all the various action plans you've identified, like landlords, contractors, service providers, and there's a whole host of others. So don't forget about those people outside of your employee base. All right, so a question we get quite often is, what do we say to people, like our audience or those contractors or landlords, providers? What do we say to them when a certain situation happens? So let's jump in and talk about it. I think the most important thing to consider here is that during a critical incident, you don't really want to waste precious time custom crafting your messages or building out those segmented employee lists, trying to figure out who should receive them. Both of those things can absolutely and should be done in advance. So spend a little time considering the most likely situations that might occur throughout the year. You're not going to get all of them, but identify the main ones, like office closures due to COVID-19. That's going to be a big one. Power outage, inclement weather. And then just think, what do I need to convey to my audience during that scenario, and who is the target for that? I don't want to go too broad. I want to be pretty narrow. And again, you're not going to get everything, but at least going through those exercises will make it so when it does happen, you'll at least have something you can go back to and maybe modify it slightly instead of having to start from scratch. And it's going to save time. So developing these pre-built notification templates that address each of the situations you identify absolutely helps you save time, but they're also important because I would say people tend to think less clearly, like I mentioned before, under stress, and just this comfort of having your message pre-established can just be a game changer. I know if something happens and I'm like, okay, what am I going to say? I sit down and I'm really thinking hard, like, what am I going to say here? And is it going to be approved by my boss or these other people in the organization? Better to get ahead of that and have already shared it with other people and know that, yeah, when I hit send on this, they've already seen it and they approved it. So they're not going to get too angry with me when that goes out. The other thing communication templates do is help you ensure the messaging is very consistent, because the last thing you want to do is send mixed messages that can start to confuse an already chaotic situation. And that's what emergencies are. It's chaos. Nobody knows what's going on because it's not normal. You don't want to add to the chaos. You want to reduce it. Now, the last thing I want to spend some time on is the importance of proactive monitoring. So on the next slide, you'll see here, it's important to keep a constant eye on the incidents occurring around your people and your locations. You are responsible for knowing about, I would say, things like completely net new incidents that are cropping up, like this storm coming into the east right now, and then maintaining situational awareness around events as they start unfolding and start getting updated that impact any physical locations that you have that are still operating, as well as, especially today, your remote workers' home offices. And that's become a really big deal now. A lot of people don't think about that. It's like, okay, I've got someone who used to run payroll at the office. Now they're doing it at home in a location 500 miles away. Can they sustain doing that with this massive snowstorm bearing down on them? Maybe we need to get ahead of that and plan for it. So it's very important to watch everything around your physical locations and where your employees are remotely working right now. And there's a ton of them out there. I mentioned one, the snowstorm coming through shortly. But there can be acts of violence, road closures, civil unrest. I mean, tons of things that can essentially pose risks to your people's safety and their ability to keep your business running. And then remember, like I said before, your organization doesn't really exist in a vacuum. So think, are there critical incidents impacting our partners or our suppliers? If so, that could absolutely impact your ability to operate. So organizations thinking several steps ahead typically watch not only their own people and locations, but also the facilities of their suppliers or even the ports they rely on. I've seen that quite a bit. If someone is a manufacturer, they're constantly watching ports around the world thinking, if we can't get supplies through that location, how's that going to affect us downstream? So think about that. It's always better to be 2 steps ahead than 2 steps behind, clearly. Now, AlertMedia's threat monitoring solution can absolutely help you keep track of all these critical incidents that might affect your people and your organization, either directly or indirectly, like through your suppliers and things like that. Our system, it delivers actionable intel in real time. It identifies the impacted individuals based on their location, and then automates the task of warning you and your people over multiple channels. So you don't have to be staring at a screen all day. You just get emails and texts that are going off saying, hey, you've got 3 locations and 1,433 people that are in harm's way for this particular incident. All right. Well, Alex, I think that takes us to our final poll before we open it up for questions and maybe one final case study.
Yes, thanks, Peter. So Peter just did a great job talking a little bit about AlertMedia's product and how we can help you monitor the world around your people and your locations, and also how we can help you communicate more effectively. So if you're interested in learning more about how we can help you in 2021 with your emergency communication strategy, and want to learn more about our software, just select yes or not at this point, and we'll be happy to follow up after today's presentation. Thanks, Bob. And Peter, I think you've got one more customer example to share with the audience, and then we can go into questions.
Absolutely. I mean, clearly being at AlertMedia, I'm sold on the idea of mass communication being important and valuable to have, and having a constant feed of threat intelligence coming in that you can view to see, do I have any people being affected? But when you can combine those two together, it becomes exponentially more valuable. And I know some people might be skeptical of that. So that's why I wanted to share this story with you guys. Kawasaki, one of the largest producers of motor vehicles in the world, make a lot of different types of vehicles. Not traditional cars, but tons of motor vehicles. During recent California wildfires, they actually leveraged location data about incidents and then their people's proximity to them to rapidly understand which of their employees might be in harm's way, so they could then rapidly communicate with them to impact the outcome there. From the first time they started receiving news of local evacuations around those fires, it only took them a few minutes to identify all the employees they had that were living within the evacuation zone or zones, in just seconds to send an alert letting those employees know they should leave. They originally postulated in theory, and then eventually found out in reality, that it's important not to dismiss the importance of location data, and essentially how it can be used to improve those outcomes. Tying the two together really made something that could have been incredibly time consuming and difficult happen really effortlessly in just a few minutes. All right. Well, I think our final thing here as we start thinking ahead to 2021, I would say that as I wrap it up here, just on what we've talked about today, and as I gave some thought to it beforehand, I mean, progress in general is based on like this iterative cycle of failure and adaptation. And in my opinion, the big lesson in 2020 from a business continuity perspective that's really going to push us forward, it's the adaptation that we're learning from failures and things that we had, is that all your continuity plans should now contemplate the layered impact of multiple simultaneous incidents. Now, hardcore DRBC people have been thinking about this for years. They'll set up an exercise that relies on certain people being available to execute a plan, and then they'll just surprise everyone by saying, Susan, Bob, John, you're all incapacitated. The rest of you go. So as you can imagine, when that happens, chaos ensues even more. And then it comes back around. The need to quickly communicate to figure out who is going to do what becomes absolutely critical. So you have to be able to communicate. So my challenge to everyone is to just think of a few steps ahead and consider more of the what ifs, the layered approach, and then make sure you take the steps to improve your ability to communicate through a purpose-built emergency communication system, not one that's kind of cobbled together and will give you trouble when you're trying to use it. So that's my thoughts. But Larry, what thoughts do you have as we wrap this up before moving on to questions?
I would agree with you. And, I've done the same thing when I've done tabletops. There's certain people that try to take the lead and are always vocal. And then many other people sit back, and I'll put in injects or give them an envelope that says, you're dead or you're incapacitated, and they can't talk. Because if you think about it, none of us can really go on vacation right now, but let's talk about normal times, non-COVID, right? If I'm on vacation in Fiji or wherever I might want to go, I may not be able to be reached. So if I'm the only person that knows how to do certain things and I have no redundancy, then the business is going to fail because I'm not going to be able to be contacted. So that's why it's important to have primary and secondary people on your plans and to exercise all these things. I cannot emphasize enough about the exercise, whether it's reviewing your plans. I strongly urge using the mass communication tools. As I said, I did it in Israel, and it was a building evacuation, and we sent it via SMS and email, and HR was in the middle of an interview with the person in their office, and it came through SMS, and she goes, "Oh, we got to postpone this. We got to go out. We got to leave," and everybody evacuated the building. But if it was on email, do you think she would have got it?
Nope.
Right.
Nope, because she wouldn't have been having it open because she was focusing on. But everybody has their phone. So that's why I think it's super important to and emphasize not to be complacent during these times, and also try to be proactive. And the more muscle memory and exercises you can do, and you're going to get pushback, but you have to share with the organization the importance. It's spend 10,000 today so you don't have to spend 20 million tomorrow because you
Yep.
didn't prepare.
Absolutely. Before we get into questions, there were a couple of comments about the last poll going quickly. So if you do want to learn more, you can definitely type that into the question box and we can follow up with you after today's presentation. There are quite a few good questions coming in. I think we can stay over for a couple minutes if the audience would like to stay over with us. If not, thank you so much for joining today. Question for you, Peter. Is there any kind of notification through AlertMedia that can be set up for the admins so that they do not have to log into the dashboard to stare at the map waiting for news or to be alerted of threats that might impact their people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having that dashboard is valuable if you have someone sitting around and that's their job, but clearly most organizations don't have those type of assets that are sitting around. So yeah, in our system, you can actually set it up to be looking for the things you program it to. And it's just, selecting boxes and pulling levers. Once you get it configured, it will then hand deliver to you via text, email, and even mobile app push those incidents that are nearby your people and locations that you care about. So 10:30 at night, there's some massive protest happening. You've got a store nearby. Right? That'll pop up on your screen. To Larry's point, the ding will happen. You'll see it. And then you can see who's impacted and go address it.
Thanks, Peter. Larry, you talked a little bit about this is the time to get leadership's attention for the budget that you might need or the program you want to get approved. Can you speak to any strategies that you've found useful in getting budget approved or your programs approved?
Well, I think it depends on the individual organization, because some are going to be more risk tolerant, some are going to be more risk averse, right? And so again, it goes out of sight, out of mind. You have to prove to them and show them an ROI, right? Because it is an investment to get a mass communication tool. But again, when we talk about people, that's the most important thing. And again, when I go back to, do you want to spend 10,000 today or 20 million tomorrow because you weren't prepared? You know, the more proactive you can be and the more things, but again, this is spending money. So most organizations, I don't need that until they do. And then it's a scramble to get it. And you have to cite all these, well, we weren't prepared for COVID. We didn't have the bandwidth because we weren't prepared. We didn't, have people working from home. So I think it's, you have to show them, especially the CFOs, because when you show them how much you saved them and by doing this in the long run, that's how you're going to get it. But each one is different, and because you are spending money, you're not sales where you're bringing in money where you can get a lot of stuff, right? And you're only important when there's an event.
Right.
If you haven't had an earthquake in a while that affected the business, it's out of sight, out of mind.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up ROI because somebody asked that as well. How do you think about ROI in something that is a cost center maybe and not earning money?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because the dollars are intangible, right? It's not about dollars and cents. You can't put a price tag on the people and all that, right? I mean, who thought about making sure that people would have multiple monitors at home, right? That wasn't an expense before because you had an office, but all the expense, people now paying for their cell phones. The companies are paying for cell phones and internet connection because they have to, right? Otherwise their employees can't work. So it's really difficult. The best thing you can say is you just have to kind of, here's what would happen if we didn't have this stuff in place, and put that
Prevention
in.
of
And
loss.
there's certain things that you can put in dollars and cents, and other things you just have to make a guess of what you're saving.
And sometimes you can simplify it a little bit and just refer back to things that are common to everybody. Like, I have life insurance, and it's the best money I ever spent if I never have to use it.
Yep.
I've got airbags in my car, same thing.
Yep.
Seat belts. I spend money on all these things. I mean, they didn't exist 100 years ago, but now I won't buy a car without those things. I won't not have life insurance. It's all things that you have to do. And the products you invest in should be priced accordingly. It seems like if you're going to go out and replicate something that's in production in a backup scenario for the same exact cost, I don't know. It depends on how important that is to the business. But if it can be had for just a very small amount of money, then it makes it worthwhile. It's priced like insurance.
Yeah, I guess to elaborate on that, Peter, is if let's say you rely on an application and you're doing $500,000 in business every month or every day with that application. Well, what happens if that application goes down? Are you willing to spend 10,000 on an alternate application that you may never ever use, but the difference between if the primary goes down, it's like circuits. Everybody has primary and secondary network circuits because they don't want to go down, right? So are you willing to spend for a secondary network? So why wouldn't you spend, if it's only going to cost you $10,000 for a year for an alternative application that you may never use, but if you have to use it, it's going to save you $500,000.
That's right.
I think that was our last question. If we didn't get to your question, we will take a look and follow up afterwards. Peter, Larry, thank you so much for your time today. And